10%. You also increase exports by 0.13% or something, or 1.3%. So there is research there that, but again, we're going to have to see how this shakes out. And the only way we can see how this shakes out, at least in my opinion, is to open up more opportunities for this market to take place and take hold, which means an overland lifting of the ban.
That makes a lot of sense to me, especially the part about serving as a stimulus to trade. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to shift a little bit to sort of the international aspect here, because obviously, if you're trying to fly transatlantic, transpacific, cross-continental flights, that requires a lot of coordination in aerospace laws across different countries. So, what does that space look like right now? Has there been coordination in terms of making sure that you can fly supersonic over large parts of the world?
Yeah, those are set by ICAO, and like I talked about earlier, they're kind of slow walking any noise or emission standards for supersonic flight. The major sticking point is really between the US and the EU when it comes to this, because the EU is a lot more temperamental about noise. And so while the US wants to create two standards, one for subsonic, one for supersonic, that would be based on the realities that the new technology will need in order to, again, sorry, take off. The EU wants a single set of standards for subsonic planes and supersonic, and that doesn't really make sense when you're looking at the technology.
So I just want to make sure, are we agreed that on the policy side, is there any fundamental disagreement here? I know there's disagreements about what the actual market share could look like, but would you mostly agree that we should remove the supersonic land ban and the other things that Alan mentioned?
Well, I think there are ways towards that. I think the real issue here is, first of all, in principle, yes. Second of all, I think it needs to be done in tandem. Technology development needs to have clear milestones in terms of technological goals, emissions goals, boom goals. But there's no reason that this can't be done with people developing technology working in tandem with regulators to come up with standards that. And I think if we were moving towards that, I actually have every confidence that would happen.
One of the things that I just picking up off those comments that would be useful here in the U.S. is giving the FAA another mission in addition to its safety mission to help advance technologies and test technologies and use technologies to make U.S. Aviation more competitive. And doing that, in addition to its safety mission, would mean that it would have to think about these competitive interests as it rolls out rules for like drones, where it doesn't have to get pushed by Congress to do it. As it rolls out rules for supersonic flight, if the technology is there, it can be monitored and followed up. But right now, the agency does not have this mission at all.
Well, one last question before we open up to audience question and answer. When you're thinking 20, 30 years out about what the future of American transportation looks like, in particular aerospace transportation, is supersonic the main technology? Are there any other technologies that we're missing out on? Or does it just continue to be subsonic flights that become more and more luxurious with better and better connectivity?
One of the things that's really cool, and this is completely off topic, but is like how we're getting closer to being able to create like electronic puddle jumpers. Like the little tiny flights that you can get from one place to another place very efficiently with electricity. And I think that maybe will come up as later on in the day. But by generating efficiencies in like one side, you can hopefully overall across supersonic, across subsonic, and these little things, like you can generate efficiencies across the entire aviation spectrum.
It could be that we see a bifurcated world where we get on the lower cost side slower, because electrical powered or hybrid planes technically are slower 9 times out of 10, versus a more elite group that travels fast. It sounds a little dystopian, but it might be the way things evolve. I'm intrigued by the idea of just skipping a generation, being done with this supersonic stuff and going to hypersonic. That has its appeal too. And we've been talking about that since the Reagan days, the Orient Express, New York to Tokyo in 5 seconds or whatever. There's a lot of very big obstacles technologically. Creating a ramjet and a scramjet or a scramjet. I mean, it's really tough to create. And this isn't a question of adapting technology from the military world, transferring it over to the civil world. This is coming up with a new way, as they joke, of lighting a match in a hurricane and hoping it doesn't go out. But if we get there, oh boy, that'd be great. I think we all want that. And single stage to orbit, the space plane that we've had around as a concept for many decades, I'm kind of intrigued by that because at the end of the day, it'd be such a quantum leap in terms of connectivity that it might be easier to charge that premium rather than living in a world where we know it's going to be more expensive and we know there'll be some regulatory issues, rightly or wrongly, and we know that the commercial world is coming up with really delightful ways of occupying our time well in the air at a slightly slower speed. So I'm kind of intrigued by the skip a generation thing.
Yeah, baby steps, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe that. Yeah.
Well, we're ready to open up for question and answer. I think there should be a microphone coming.
I didn't actually come here expecting to do much speaking, but I do have I have a little axe to grind. The CEO of Boom went to Carnegie Mellon with my son, and he's a friend of mine. So I know I have read quite a lot about what he is doing. My understanding is he wants to have the FAA bring down the noise requirements instead of the speed requirements, so that no matter how fast you go, as long as you don't make too much noise, you'll be all right. Another thing, he's planning on going 2.2 Mach and charging about what business class passengers pay for their now less than 2.2 Mach. And also, I've heard about other planes which are being in the works that are smaller and slower than his. He will hold 55 passengers. These others hold 12, 15, something like that. So I don't see any real competition between him and anybody else coming up at all. Now, maybe I've missed something.
No. I mean, look, I like his idea. This industry is in part predicated upon people adding value with new inventions. We can't begin to have the conversation about economics, airfares, anything until we have an engine. It's got nothing to do with the airframe. It's got nothing to do with the regulations. Fuel burn and therefore economics is determined by engine. Now, it could be that tomorrow he comes up with an engine or somebody develops an engine for him, in which case I will say, I cannot wait. But we can't have the conversation until he has an engine.
And they've already said, at least to trade press, that they think that they can get parity with subsonic planes in the future, but they're only building a demonstrator now. So I think we should be cognizant of where they are after the demonstrator flight and like what the actual passenger plane will look like before we jump to conclusions.
You mentioned some of the fundamentals is about the engine itself, and it's great to see that the engine is getting more efficient, yet it's still operating on a hydrocarbon fuel. What's the technology around the fuel itself as far as changes around that goes, and what kind of evolution are we looking at for both that? And of course, then you're looking at infrastructure, then you'd have to change the engines themselves once you change the fuels, and so on.
Do you want me to, or do you want to?
If you'd like.
Like I said earlier, for aviation, the fuel necessary will have to be very energy dense, which requires fossil fuels until we create some sort of alternative energy that is as strong, which is why the only electric planes that we're seeing today are very small, very slow planes. So just jumping out, like into the future, what we're going to be doing with supersonic flight is making the frame more efficient and making the engine more efficient, which it'll probably still run on fossil fuels for the foreseeable future. But like variable cycle wings, where this is far out in the future, but like where the airplane is able to change its shape, the shape of its wings to make it more efficient depending on how fast it's going, or the engine, which is able to again change based on how fast it's going to make it more efficient. But we're looking at that kind of margin, right? We're not really looking at changing the fuel as of yet until someone invents a brand new fuel. Do you have anything to add?
I strongly, strongly agree. I love the question. I just regret to say that we're probably the last part of the economy that uses decaying dinosaurs. But there are a lot of baby steps on the way there. Hybrid propulsion, the idea of having a central turbine driving independent propellers or fans or whatever else. A lot of promise there. But in terms of going fast, energy density argues, I'm afraid, that for the foreseeable future, we just need hydrocarbons.
Hi, Richard was giving me flashbacks talking about National Aerospace Plane and Orient Express. I had a couple of observations. One is I think that the fuel efficiency of the engine has been one thing contributing to lower costs in the airline industry, but it's also packing people in tighter than ever before. The seats on a 787 today are narrower than they were on a 707 60 years ago. They're much better at selling at high load factors. They don't give away baggage for free. They don't give away anything for free, and have cut a lot of indirect costs. And I think that's probably changed the market more than anything else. So it does come back to the question of it all comes back to value of speed, and with reference to the comment about connectivity. Okay, you're not out of touch, so saving speed is less valuable. I think it also comes down to the sort of quantum jumps it makes possible if you go faster in terms of schedule. For example, just traveling transcontinental eastbound, today you've got a choice between spending the entire day in travel, or you can spend the night in travel. Neither of those is optimum. If you actually had a supersonic transcontinental, then, in theory, you could leave Los Angeles late afternoon and get to the East Coast, late in the evening, but not after midnight. And that's a complicated issue, and we had tremendous fun debating that when we were bringing Concorde into service. But I think it's worth looking at, because I think that is actually one of the major changes it makes possible to air travel.
Yeah, Bill Sweeten, everybody, has written an awful lot of great books on the subject of everything from space planes to supersonic travel to most of all stealth airplanes. So thanks for your question, Bill. First of all, on the issue of critical mass, I can't emphasize this enough. And it gets back to the elasticity of demand you typically see in the airline business. Since we had internet pricing, you've had this ugly phenomenon, the arrival of ultra low-cost carriers. And everyone gets on the web to book a ticket to somewhere, and they complain about their increasingly smaller, as you cram them in, seat pitches going down to, I think, about just enough to get my knees. And they just book on the lowest fare, regardless. And it's amazing how many people who are upper middle class or even wealthy who still go for the lowest fare. We are addicted to cheap in this business, and it's on the